Foundations of Morality by Henry Hazlitt, an immensely stimulating and sorely neglected work of 20th century ethical philosophy. So, Henry Hazlitt is probably best remembered today for his book Economics in One Lesson. But not only was he an economist, he was also, as this book demonstrates, a pretty adept philosopher, in particular an ethicist. And this book serves both as a sweeping and quite thorough survey of various different modes of ethical thought, but it also advocates for a specific ethical system which Hazlitt refers to, I believe, as cooperatism. Now, the system of ethics which this book propounds is a form of utilitarianism. A specific form of utilitarianism. And I want to say up front, right here at the outset, that I am not in any way, shape, or form a utilitarian. I am firmly deontological in my ethical beliefs. Right and wrong are not mere matters of expedience, but are the most sacred of ideals. And even if the fate of the entire world hinged on the commission of a wrong, it might be pragmatic to commit that wrong, but it would never be right. So that is to say, this book is actually one which I would, in certain respects, contest. Although, with that said, I still found it an immensely absorbing read, and one that I really quite enjoyed. And I will say this in its favor: this is about as close as I probably could ever come to subscribing to a system of utilitarian ethics. And it did actually give me a deeper appreciation for that type of ethical thinking, even if I still don't really agree with it. So this book is pretty sizable, and there's a lot to it. I'm not going to probably be able to cover everything that the book covers, but Hazlitt in the book kind of begins with questioning what is the purpose of morality? Why do we need ethics at all? And his answer is for the purposes of social cooperation. That is, a person in complete isolation would probably have no need of a system of ethics because, who would they be ethical or unethical with? So the purpose, Hazlitt says, of ethics in the book is for peaceful and harmonious and productive social cooperation in which we each can strive to attain our own desired ends. And as I said, this is a form of utilitarianism, but it is a very specific form of utilitarianism, which Hazlitt refers to, I believe, as rule utilitarism. That is to say, it is not utilitarian as regards actions, but rather rules of actions. So it's not about individual acts and decisions so much as it is about the rules which we apply to acts and decisions. And also in this book, he talks about long run happiness versus short run happiness. And one of the most original conclusions that Hazlitt comes to in this book, I would say, is his definition of what constitutes wrong or evil, or at least what constitutes some wrong or evil. And that has to do with time preferences, again, kind of referring back to Hazlitt's background in economics. You can have either low or high time preferences. And Hazlitt asserts in the book that much evil, or what we would call evil, quote unquote, actually perhaps can be traced back to very, very high rates of discount. That is very, very short-term thinking. That was actually a pretty valuable insight, I would say. I think that has quite a bit of merit to it. But also Hazlitt talks about the relationship between ethics and law. That was very interesting, that section. And he also talks about duty for duty's sake, and that kind of involves a critique of like Kant's ethical system with that categorical imperative. Hazlitt is not in agreement with Kant because Kant was not a utilitarian. And also he questions the notion of justice as a moral end in itself. Hazlitt conversely posits that justice and morality overall, these things are not ends in themselves, they're just means to the fulfillment of our desires as people. And that is another thing that I would actually contest. I do think that justice is kind of an ultimate end. I don't think that justice is necessarily a means, but still, I did understand his perspective on that. And also, he talks about asceticism and about why punishing yourself needlessly is kind of retarded. That I did agree with him. I mean, that we have instances of like mass self-flagellation throughout history, especially in like the Dark Ages with the Black Death and whatnot. Yeah, that didn't really serve much purpose and was just involved a lot of needless suffering. So I would agree with him on that point. And then he talks about ethical skepticism, and this also I think is a quite valuable discussion because there are people who confess to be ethical nihilists. Those who profess that morality and ethics are just matters of opinion. There is no real like qualifiable basis for morality and ethical behavior. And Hazlitt rightly calls that out as basically being bullshit. That, like, you can say that you don't believe in right or wrong, but it's a whole different matter when you're on the receiving end of some wrong behavior. It would be a rare individual indeed who could probably hold to that opinion even while they are being victimized. And so, even the people who say that they don't believe in right and wrong, they probably do deep down, especially if they were to be confronted with some serious wrong. So that section was also quite stimulating. And then he also discusses equality and inequality and the kind of differing views on those notions. As well, he talks about freedom and the differing and conflicting, oftentimes, perspectives on that topic. And also, he talks about free will and determinism. And this I found very interesting because, as he says in the book here, you can write entire books about ethics without addressing the topic of free will versus determinism and whether free will is actually a thing or not. But at heart, that actually may be the definitive issue when it comes to the field of ethics. Because if your will is not free, then what even is the point of passing moral judgments if nobody can be held accountable for their actions? And Hazlitt's ultimate conclusion is that yes, determinism, as in causality, A precedes B, B precedes C, etc., is inescapable. That is the very fundamental nature of the universe that we inhabit and of which we are a part. But that does not preclude the potential for moral and immoral behavior and the choice between good and evil. That these things are not truly antagonistic to each other. And ultimately, he advocates for a compatibilist position that recognizes that, yes, you can't escape from causation, but yet free will as we commonly conceive of it, what we mean by free will in terms of ethical behavior or unethical behavior, is still a very viable thing. And then he talks about rights as well. And this was also, I think, a quite stimulating section and one that has a lot of pertinence to today because of how often the word right is abused in today's world and how much it has been abused throughout history. We see that definitely today with people calling for the right to housing or the right to health care. Now, that's not at all to say that I myself don't want people to have housing or health care, but those things are not in any way, shape, or form, properly speaking, rights. And so when we talk of rights, we need to restrict our meaning to the proper meaning of that word. And then he goes into quite a bit of depth on the comparative ethics of capitalism and socialism, because again, he was coming from a background in economics. And that was also very interesting as he undertakes an ethical analysis of the differing systems of capitalism and socialism to understand the moral viewpoints that underlie them. That was actually pretty weighty there, I would say. And then he has a chapter on morality and religion. And Hazlitt, I believe Hazlitt was an agnostic throughout his life, and he states in his section on morality and religion that even though morality has historically probably in large part come from, or at the very least been tied up with theology, especially as he says in like primitive societies where the priest, the shaman, is kind of simultaneously the lawgiver, the rule maker. These things, in their infancy, kind of are tied up with each other. But Hazlitt says that there is no like necessity for morality to be based in religion, that secular ethics is perfectly viable and fine. Although he does say that religion definitely does help when it comes to fostering and enforcing moral systems, because there's kind of the carrot and the stick, the heaven and the hell thing, which can definitely aid in instilling morality in people successfully. So yeah, that is more or less the overview, if you will, of Henry Hazlitt's The Foundations of Morality. This book is just really an absorbing read, or at least it was for me. And again, I don't count myself a utilitarian in any way. I still subscribe to a more deontological conception of ethics, but I will say once again that this book really helped me gain a new appreciation for utilitarianism, even though I think you can still pick holes in it. But it was really just a magisterial work because of how well it was presented, and because of just the level of depth and comprehensiveness on display here. It's a very impressive work, and that makes it all the more odd that it's not talked about more than it is. This is a pretty obscure, dare I say it, a very obscure work now that is almost never brought up in discussion when talking about the most like influential ethical treatises of the 20th century, like Principia Ethica by G.E. Moore, or John Rawls's A Theory of Justice. Like, this definitely deserves to be talked about alongside those other works, because this is a serious work that definitely warrants consideration. It's really a great work, and if you are interested in the field of ethics and moral philosophy, you really owe it to yourself probably to pick this up, because it makes one hell of a case. It really does. With non-fictional works of the philosophical nature like this, I generally don't rate those, and I'm not going to rate the Foundations of Morality either. But I will say once again, if you're into this kind of stuff, definitely seek this book out, because I would say it is well worth your time. It's very stimulating, very thought provoking, and it's presented so well, and it's very thorough, and it can be quite persuasive in its arguments. I really do have to tip my hat to this, honestly, even though it's something that I would contest in certain respects. But anyway, so The Foundations of Morality by Henry Hazlitt. Have you read this book? I'm willing to bet most viewers out there probably have not, because, as I said, this is a rather neglected work now. But if you have, on the off chance, let me know what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with it or with anything I've said about it. Let me know as well whether you subscribe to a more utilitarian or deontological conception of ethics. I would be curious to know. And yeah, like I say, if you are into moral philosophy and ethics, definitely seek this book out because I think it's definitely worth your time to read. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.